Question 6. The passage as a whole relies strongly on which of the following techniques? So here we have another list of literary terms. These are probably all pretty familiar to you by now, but we'll run through them quickly. A. Alliteration. This is when the beginning consonant sound of two or more words in close proximity is the same, and although there are occasional instances of this device in this passage, you can't by any means say that the passage as a whole relies strongly on it, so you can cross out A. B. Simile. This, as you probably remember, is a comparison between two objects using the word like or as. There is, I believe, only one simile in this entire passage, and that's in the first paragraph here, shattered like a walnut shell. That one simile hardly qualifies as enough to say that the passage as a whole relies on it strongly, so cross out B. Hyperbole. Again, I believe the only possible hyperbole or extreme exaggeration in this passage is the sarcastic comment that the narrator makes about the street seeming to be designed for the express purpose of laming or crippling all living creatures, which might be considered an exaggeration. However, like the last two, this isn't enough to qualify for this question, so cross out C as well. D. Paradox. Remember that this is a statement or situation in which two things are apparently or actually contradictory but often reveal a truth, and there isn't really anything like that going on here, so cross out D. E. Imagery. So here we are at the last one, and yes, indeed, this passage is chock full of imagery. You could even say that the passage relies strongly on it. The author uses imagery here to paint a picture for us of this incident that happens in a narrow street in the suburb of San Antoine. So the best answer is E. Imagery. Question 7. The contrast between the way people act when there is still wine in the street and when all the wine has been drunk does what? A. It shows that their enthusiasm for anything will inevitably be short-lived. There's no support for this answer. You have to make some assumptions that simply aren't supported by the passage to choose this. There's nothing in the passage itself that indicates that their enthusiasm for just anything will be short-lived, so cross out A. B. Is expressed in stark, emotionless language. While the narrator here is somewhat detached and some of the descriptions are stark, the language is not completely emotionless in either the description of the celebrating behavior while the wine is there or in their return to their former activities after it's gone. During the celebration, you have some special companionship and frolicsome embraces. The narrator has some feeling, some sympathy here, enough to use these more evocative words to describe the connection these people are feeling as they drink this wine together. Then, when they return to their former activities, he tells us the woman has been trying to soften the pain in her own starved fingers and toes or in those of her child. There's an understated emotion here in the use of the word trying and the phrases soften the pain, starved fingers and toes. And there's a subtle tugging at her heartstrings that this woman is not only in this situation herself, but that she has a child who's suffering similarly in spite of her efforts. So this surely isn't the best answer if there's a better one. Let's look further. C highlights the poverty and hardships of the characters' lives. This is better. Think about it. Here is this celebratory event when everyone drops what they're doing and starts celebrating and dancing and playing over wine that has been spilled in the street. They are drinking wine from puddles on the ground in the street. Notice that not only do some of them chew on wood of the broken cask or barrel to get the wine that's soaked into it, but they even end up eating mud so that they don't miss out on a drop of the precious wine. These are the actions of people who don't get wine very often, who don't get anything very often, starving people who are living in abject poverty. Then, when they return to their previous activities, we see the woman trying to soften the pain in her starved fingers and toes in front of a pot of ashes, the men with cadaverous or corpse-like faces with bare arms, even though it's winter. The wine hasn't changed anything, not for very long anyway. They return to their previous activities because there's nothing else for them to do. These people are poor, starving, and the contrast between their actions while the wine is there and after it's gone highlight the hardships that they face. So C, highlights the poverty and hardships of the characters' lives, is a very good answer. D, makes the celebration of the wine actually seem in bad taste and inappropriate. No, there isn't any indication of this in the passage. There isn't anything that hints at a sort of judgment that we should feel toward the people about the inappropriateness of their actions, so cross out D. E illustrates the narrator's overly simplistic treatment of the subject at hand. This answer has no support either. There's nothing overly simplistic about the narrator's treatment. Cross out E. And the best answer is C, highlights the poverty and hardships of the characters' lives. Question 8. The attitude of the narrator towards the people in the passage is best described as what? A, disjointed admiration. Well, you might, by stretching, conclude that the narrator has some admiration for the people in the passage. After all, he mentions that the men help the women, and he points out the care that the women take for the infants or children, so possibly he admires them based on this. There's nothing disjointed about the passage, and certainly not about his attitude in particular, so this answer doesn't make sense. Cross it out. B, distant uncertainty. This again doesn't really make sense. There's nothing uncertain in the author's tone or attitude here, so get rid of B. C, delicate disapproval. His descriptions don't indicate disapproval. We feel his sympathy when he criticizes the rough stones of the street, when he speaks of the special companionship and the frolicsome embraces of the woman who's so cold that there's pain in her starved fingers and in those of her child. So this won't work. Cross out C. D, detached pity. Detached means separate, aloof, or objective. So the narrator's attitude is somewhat detached. He doesn't get into the details of individuals. He doesn't get into the character's thoughts. He's viewing them completely from the outside. So he is being detached or objective. However, at the same time, he does have pity for them, as we see in the lines we just looked at. He takes time to mention those small details, such as the woman trying to soften her starved fingers and toes, and that her child is in a similar situation, that the men are so starved that they look like dead people, that they have bare arms in the cold of winter. So, detached pity is a good answer. E, distinct unconcern. No, based on what we just looked at, the narrator does not seem to be unconcerned, and certainly not to a degree that his unconcern is distinct or very clear. This answer is incorrect, so cross out E. And the best answer is D, detached pity. Question 9. Because the setting is specified late in the passage, line 46, it is most likely true that what? A note for this question. This is one of those question and answer choices that indirectly requires you to evaluate what you can and can't know based just on the passage. Remember, when you're answering questions, the answer you choose should not go outside the scope of the reading passage. You might be familiar with the larger work that the passage comes from, in this case, A Tale of Two Cities. Maybe you read it in high school already. But keep in mind that the questions are not designed so that you have to be familiar with the larger work in order to come to the correct response. Sometimes if you are familiar with the work, some answers might throw you off. So let's see what we can do with this. Again, the question is, because the setting is specified late in the passage, line 46, it is most likely true that what? And we see that the setting is Saint Antoine, a suburb of Paris. And our first answer choice is A, knowing where the event took place is the least important part of the passage. No, this is making an assumption that we can't make based on the passage. With nothing else but this passage to go on, we don't know if where this happened is the least important thing or the most important. So we can't choose this answer. We have to cross out A. B, the reader is intended to be guessing where the passage takes place until it is revealed. This isn't a very good answer. The passage is not written in such a way that leads us to assume that we're meant to be guessing about where it happens. We can't find that intentionality on the part of the author, so based on the passage, we can't make that assumption. C, this event is representative of what could happen in other similar places as well. This is better. This is certainly something that could happen in other similar places. It's reasonable to assume that the author puts the location late in the passage so that this event can be seen as representative of what could happen elsewhere. It's not contradicted by the passage. It's reasonable, and we don't have to go beyond the scope of the passage to reach this conclusion. With nothing but the passage to go on, this is the best answer so far. D, the setting is essential to understanding the passage, but would have made the rest of the passage less engaging if revealed earlier. This answer might tempt you if you're familiar with the story in the book. You might know that it's very significant that this is happening in Saint Antoine, Paris. However, remember that the question is not assuming that you know the whole story. Your answer must come from the passage itself. And also, there's no reason to think that the passage would be less engaging if we'd known at the beginning where this is taking place. So this answer won't work. Cross out D. E. Knowledge of the setting is unlikely to play a large role in the reader's understanding of the scene. Again, this answer takes us outside the scope of the passage. Remember, Dickens, the author, didn't write this as a standalone passage for the AP Literature and Composition exam. This is part of a larger story, a novel. We don't know just from this passage if the knowledge of the setting is likely or unlikely to play a large role in our understanding of this scene. So we can't choose this answer just based on the passage. Cross out E. And of the answers we have, the best one is C. This event is representative of what could happen in other similar places as well. Question 10. The purpose of the passage as a whole is to what? A. Suggest that later violence could be avoided. No, there's no indication here that the violence that is hinted at beginning in line 55 could have been avoided. Again, if you're familiar with the book, you might think that the violence that happens later could have been avoided if something were done about the poverty early on. But that's going outside the scope of the passage. And remember that the questions are not designed that way. Nothing in the passage itself suggests this, so cross out A. B. Prime the reader for the violence to follow. This is a better answer. Lines 55 and 56 clearly tell us that violence is to follow. Prime here means prepare, and this passage leads up to lines 55 and 56, where we're told that violence is coming. Blood is going to be spilled on the street stones, just like the wine was spilled, and many of these people will be stained with it. So yes, you can assume that this passage is preparing us for violence to follow. Because of lines 55 and 56, we don't have to go outside of the scope of the passage itself to assume that. So B is a good answer. C. Place blame on the people of the neighborhood for future violence. There's no blame indicated here. As a matter of fact, just based on the passage, we don't know for sure if these people will be victims of the violence or the perpetrators. We're just told that blood will be spilled on the street and that the stain of it will be on many of these people. Whether they're to blame or not is not addressed here at all. Again, watch out here if you already know the story. Just based on the passage, you have to eliminate C. D. Analyze the relationships of the people in the neighborhood to humanize their struggle. No, there's not any analysis of the relationships of these people. Some of their interactions are described, but they are not analyzed. Cross out D. E. Examine the nature of a conflict that could lead to violence. There is no conflict mentioned here other than that of man versus nature with the cold, or man versus environment with the impoverished conditions, and we don't get any indication of how or even if those particular conflicts lead to violence, so this answer won't work. Again, if you've read the story already, this might throw you off if you're considering the main conflict of the novel, but that conflict's not mentioned here. So cross out E, and the best answer is B, prime the reader for the violence to follow.